When tech billionaire Roland Smith survives a plane crash and wakes in a hospital bed, he makes a chilling discovery. It wasn't an accident. It was an execution attempt. But instead of announcing his survival, he chooses silence. Behind closed eyes, he listens as his wife and brother plot to steal his empire. With nothing but time, secrets, and a stranger's sympathy, Roland begins orchestrating the most dangerous comeback in corporate history. Not from a boardroom, but from a coma. Hello family, welcome to True Life Stories. Please subscribe and leave a like for us, it means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones, and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you as you do so. Sit back and relax as we dive into the story. The roar of twin jet engines hummed like a lullaby above the clouds, steady and unthreatening. Inside the opulent cabin of the Smith Core 1, the scent of aged leather and cedarwood drifted through the air, mingling with the faint trace of freshly brewed espresso. A stack of confidential dossiers lay spread across a walnut inlay desk where Roland Smith, founder and CEO of Smith Core Industries, scribbled notes with a fountain pen engraved with his initials. To the world, Roland was untouchable, a visionary, a tech baron with a sharp mind and sharper instincts. A man who had climbed from the concrete cracks of East Manchester to the highest floors of Silicon Valley skyscrapers. He had survived lawsuits, betrayal, corporate takeovers, even a scandal involving a now-disgraced senator. But none of that had prepared him for what would come at 32,000 feet above sea level. He barely had time to react when the first tremor rattled the jet. A single clunk, subtle but off rhythm. Then a second, louder, more ominous. The cabin lights flickered. Roland looked up, his pen freezing mid-word. Across from him, his assistant Mark glanced up from his laptop, eyes narrowing. What was that? Before either of them could rise, the jet lurched violently to the left, knocking the espresso cup to the floor where it shattered in a spray of porcelain. Overhead compartments burst open. Oxygen masks dropped like puppets cut from their strings. A low whine began to rise, a metallic screech so unnatural it triggered something primal in Roland's chest. He was halfway out of his seat when a violent explosion rocked the fuselage. A ball of flame scorched the rear cabin, and all went black. He woke to silence. But not the silence of peace. It was the eerie hush that comes after chaos, the kind that presses against your eardrums and steals your breath. Somewhere in the distance, a machine beeped steadily. The room smelled sterile. Bleach. Antiseptic. Blood. Roland's first instinct was to speak, to shout, but his body refused. His throat was dry, his limbs heavy. The only part of him that responded was his mind, and it was sprinting. Where was he? Was he paralyzed? Dead? His hearing sharpened. He caught the muffled voices of doctors outside the door, the rustle of paper, the low hiss of air through a vent. Then a soft mechanical tone, the door opening. No sign of cognitive function yet, said a voice, male, clipped, clinical. Roland remained still, instinct telling him to listen. He's stable, said another. But the trauma to his head. We just have to wait. A light touch grazed his wrist, perhaps checking his fore. Then they left. The door closed. He was alone. And awake. For 2 days, Roland feigned stillness, cataloging every sound, every whisper. Pain flickered along his ribs. His left temple throbbed. He replayed the crash in his mind, the pressure, the fire, the screams. But something didn't sit right. The tremors before the explosion. The fact that his security pilot hadn't sent a mayday. His gut said one word: sabotage. By day 3, he was certain. The jet hadn't malfunctioned. Someone wanted him dead. And that's when he made his decision. He would stay in the coma, or at least, let them think he had. He would listen. Watch. Observe from the shadows of his silence. He had built an empire by controlling every variable in the system. This time, the variable was himself. Lying in the sterile solitude of his hospital suite, Roland Smith did the one thing no one would expect from a man like him. He pretended to be dead to the world. And so began his greatest and most dangerous act, not as CEO, not as tech tycoon, but as a ghost haunting his own empire. The days passed slowly for Roland Smith, though he marked them not by clocks, but by the rhythms of footsteps and whispered conversations echoing just beyond the hospital room's reinforced glass doors. He lay in the same position, eyes closed, breathing even, body inert. Occasionally, he allowed his fingers to twitch faintly under the sheets, testing muscle memory, but never in sight of the monitors or cameras. He was a statue with a beating heart, a man buried alive in silk sheets and ventilated air. By the 5th day, the visitors began to arrive, not friends, not family in the affectionate sense, but players stepping onto the stage. The first was his wife. Clara Smith entered with a scent of rose water and restraint, her heels echoing against the cold marble as she crossed the room with deliberate elegance. She wore a navy blue pantsuit, hair pulled tight in a chignon, not a strand out of place. She didn't touch him, not even a hand on the arm, as she approached the bed. "Roland," she whispered, her tone unreadable. "You look better than I expected." He felt her eyes scanning him, searching for signs of life. "You always did love dramatics," she murmured, almost amused. Then her voice dropped lower. "Let's hope you're still good at faking it." She turned toward the glass door. Outside stood Alex Smith, his younger half-brother, tall, lean, and charming in that deliberate, curated way that made him both likable and unsettling. Unlike Roland, Alex had always preferred optics to innovation, power to principle. His suit was 3 shades lighter than hers, as if chosen to complement her presence. They made a striking pair, a little too striking. "Come in," Clara said quietly. Alex stepped inside, glanced once at Roland, and then joined her at the foot of the bed. Their reflections ghosted across the glass wall behind them, their voices a careful murmur not meant to be heard. But Roland had spent years perfecting the art of reading lips and listening between silences. Even behind closed eyelids, he saw and heard enough. "We need to move forward," Clara said. "The board is getting restless. They'll want a decision." Alex's jaw tightened. "Not yet. A few more days. If we push too soon, it'll look like a power grab." "It is a power grab," she replied evenly. There was a pause. Then Alex smirked faintly. "Touché." Clara folded her arms. "And the clause?" Roland's ears sharpened. "The clause." Alex exhaled slowly. Article 16. Executive incapacitation. If the CEO is declared medically unfit to lead for 14 consecutive days, the board has the authority to transfer executive power to the acting chair. That's me, with full operational control. "And permanent control?" Clara asked. Alex hesitated. "Permanent only if a second clause is triggered death or indefinite coma." Her silence was heavier than any reply. "And the doctors?" she asked at last. "I've arranged a meeting with Dr. Lauren. He's cooperative. All we need is the medical certification. The board trusts him." Roland's heart thudded beneath the thin cotton hospital gown. Dr. Lauren. He'd suspected him for years. A brilliant but morally flexible physician who owed Alex favors, the kind of man like Roland wouldn't permit. "I'll handle the board," Alex continued. "You keep Diana distracted." Clara's expression flickered, not fear but irritation. "She's been asking questions," Clara said. "About the crash. The jet's black box data still hasn't been released to me. She's been calling the FAA." "Let her," Alex said coldly. "She's loyal, but she's also naive. I've already submitted a complaint to the bar's ethics committee. Found some financial discrepancies in her trust accounts. Enough to trigger an internal investigation. She'll be too busy saving her license to meddle in ours." Roland felt the air thicken. Diana Coleman, his personal counsel, mentor, and oldest friend. The woman who had defended him during 2 SEC audits, buried his enemies in litigation, and once negotiated a $500 million acquisition deal with nothing but a burner phone and a 3-page memo. She was a lioness, and they were trying to put a muzzle on her. "I want him alive for the vote," Alex added, nodding toward Roland. "But if he wakes up before then, we adapt." "Do you really think he doesn't know?" Clara asked. "I think he suspects," Alex said. "That's why he flew to Geneva. That meeting wasn't on the company calendar." He found something. But it doesn't matter now. We control the narrative. And then, as if on cue, both of them turned and walked out of the room, heels clicking in cold sync as the door whispered shut behind them. Roland lay in the same position, his face placid, but inside fire churned. They were going to take everything. They had planned the timing, rigged the systems, manipulated the board, all with surgical precision. This wasn't just opportunism. This had been planned. But it wasn't fear that filled him. It was clarity. The board had 14 days. He had 9 left. He would spend each one listening, memorizing, preparing. And when he returned, they'd learn what it meant to try and bury a man who knew how to rise. The mornings in the suite were always the same. The blinds rose mechanically with the rising sun. Machines beeped their polite rhythms. A nurse would come in, take vitals, adjust the 4, check the catheter. Everything was orderly, controlled, clinical. But on day 6, the rhythm changed. The footsteps were different. Softer, lighter, unhurried. Not the confident staccato of overworked hospital staff. These steps carried caution. Not fear, but something careful, as if the person walking needed to be invisible. Roland felt it immediately. Whoever had entered was not part of the original rotation. He heard a clipboard being gently placed on the counter. A pause. Then the voice. "Good morning, Mr. Smith." Female. Mid-30s, perhaps. Her tone was neither robotic nor overly cheery like the others. It was clean, measured, and strangely familiar. "I'm Susan. I'll be taking care of you for the next few days." She moved around the bed with quiet confidence. The touch of her fingers on his wrist was steady, professional, but attentive. She wasn't rushing. She was observing. As she adjusted the 4-line, she spoke softly, as if to herself. Vital stable. Reflexes slightly reactive in the toes. A beat. Interesting. Roland didn't react. Not yet. But he could feel her watching him. For several days she returned, always on the same shift. Late mornings to early evening. And each time, she brought something else into the room. A book, a bit of jazz playing low from her tablet, or a story she would tell as though speaking to herself. He recognized her stories weren't just stories. They were messages. On day 8, she returned during a lull in staff rotations. The hallway beyond the glass was empty. The cameras, Roland had learned, were poorly maintained. There was a blind spot just beside the corner 4 stand, exactly where she now stood. When I first applied for this position," she said, adjusting a fresh saline bag, "I used a fake name. Susan Monroe. It was the alias I gave when I was 19 and got caught sneaking into a pharmaceutical convention with a press badge I'd printed at home." She chuckled quietly. "They didn't press charges. But someone from SmithCorp blacklisted me. Took down my blog, scrubbed my credentials, destroyed everything I'd built. I was just a kid with a camera and a question. Why was your company testing off-patent drugs in unregistered trials overseas?" Roland's stomach clenched. His facial expression didn't change, but his mind lit up. Susan continued, now leaning slightly closer. "They called it an accident, a paperwork error. But I had the data, the photos. And after they came for me, I had nothing." She looked directly at his face now. "Until last week." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded photo. The corner of a blown-up lab report, water-stained and faded, but real. She slipped it just beneath the corner of his pillow, where cameras wouldn't catch it. "I didn't take this job for the paycheck," she whispered. "I took it because I knew something was coming. And when your jet went down, I knew it wasn't random." She walked slowly to the foot of the bed. "You don't know me, Mr. Smith. But I know you. I know your enemies. And I know they're circling. Your wife and your brother? They're not just waiting. They're planning." Roland's pulse was racing now, his heart monitor pinging a bit faster. Susan noticed. She smiled faintly. "I thought so," she whispered. "You are awake, aren't you?" He didn't move. "Don't worry," she said. "I won't tell anyone. Not yet." She straightened up, collected her clipboard, and turned to leave. At the door, she paused and added just loud enough for the hallway mic to pick up. Still no change in responsiveness. No movement. No reflexive eye motion. And then more softly as the door hissed open. Blink twice tomorrow morning if you're ready to fight back. That night, Roland didn't sleep. He stared behind closed eyelids, every sense sharpened to a razor's edge. Susan had risked everything to get to him. She'd seen something in him. A spark, a potential ally, or maybe just a man with nothing left to lose but everything to reclaim. And now the game had changed. No longer alone in his silence, he had an ally in the room. A ghost from a forgotten chapter of his company's sins, now reborn as his last chance for justice. Tomorrow he would blink, and the resurrection would begin. At precisely 7:03 the next morning, just as the sunlight touched the edge of the room's engineered hardwood floors, Roland Smith blinked. Twice. Susan caught it mid-check. Her hand paused on his pulse monitor, but her eyes didn't leave his. There was no expression on her face, not relief, not shock, only a slight tightening of her jaw. She nodded once, subtly, as if they had just signed a contract. From that moment forward, everything changed. She no longer spoke to him as if he were absent. Instead, she began narrating her movements in code. "Time for your pressure check," she'd say aloud, while slipping a miniature wireless earpiece into the crease between his head and the pillow. It was nearly invisible, a prototype, no doubt smuggled in from black market labs where disgraced tech engineers found second lives. "Just need to adjust your comfort settings," she'd murmur, while quietly planting a flexible sensor pad beneath his left heel, one that responded to micro-movements. It took 3 days to build the silent language they needed. A tap of his thumb beneath the sheet meant yes. A subtle flex of his toes meant no. 2 taps, followed by a pause and a third, meant repeat. He trained for hours, forcing his dormant muscles into minute responses without ever breaking his external facade. It was excruciating. His body screamed to move, to stretch, to sit up and confront, but the mind was king now. And the mind had one goal: take back control. Late on the 3rd night, Susan returned with a backpack tucked beneath her coat. Inside was an item Roland recognized immediately, a Smith Core-designed Echolink tablet. But this one was different. It had been gutted and rebuilt from the inside out, rogue firmware, detached from any central server, untraceable. A ghost machine. She placed it gently on the bed beside him, its screen black until she tapped a 4-finger pattern. The interface that lit up was not the public-facing corporate OS. It was raw code. Backdoor access. "This is your shadow terminal," she whispered, sitting beside him and placing a small finger brace on his right index finger. "You speak, it listens. It'll read your commands like a digital stenographer. Doesn't store anything locally. No Wi-Fi. Data gets dumped into a timed relay burst every 6 hours through a satellite bounce." She paused, looking directly at him. "Whatever you're planning, you start here." Roland stared at the screen, then tapped his finger. Once slowly. The screen blinked. A voice responded, neutral and female. Command recognized. His first words were few, whispered hoarsely but precise. "Open private server vault. Key file, Trident protocol." It took 30 seconds. 30 seconds to unlock secrets only he and one other man had ever accessed. And what spilled out onto the encrypted screen made his pulse spike. Dozens of flagged transactions. Hidden shell companies. Fabricated invoices routed through subsidiary entities. All traced to Alex Smith. It wasn't just a betrayal. It was a long game, spanning years. Alex had slowly bled funds from operational budgets, disguised as R&D expenses or marketing contracts with fake vendors. In the last 18 months alone, over $183 million had been diverted. Roland's finger trembled. And then there was Clara. Her name was less present, more elusive, but the connections were there. Private meetings logged under dummy identities, legal requests filed through obscure arbitration firms, documents buried deep in server logs titled only by code names. Monarch Rise, Slate Trade, Reef Fire. The most chilling document was a scanned form from a private bank in Liechtenstein. Clara's signature. The beneficiary line, A. Smith. Susan watched his reaction. She didn't speak. I need, he whispered, throat ragged. She leaned in. Marius. She froze. Ren. He blinked once. Jesus, she whispered. He's off-grid. Has been for years. Roland closed his eyes briefly, then nodded. Find him. Marius Ren had once been Smith Corps' internal security architect. A savant with ethics more fluid than Roland's comfort level, but loyalty that had never wavered. Ren had disappeared after uncovering a scandal in a government surveillance contract. A scandal Roland had shut down, costing Ren his career. If he was still alive, he would be the only one capable of what Roland needed, a digital resurrection. Susan exhaled. All right, she said. But if I do this, we cross a line. You realize that, don't you? He stared at her, unwavering. She reached for her tablet and typed a single phrase into a non-traceable command box. Locate Ren. Authorization key. Shadow return _9. It took 20 hours. The message bounced across satellite relays, passed through cryptographic layers embedded in old news server APIs, then finally reached its destination. At 2:12 a.m., the Echolink tablet blinked once. Incoming message. Welcome back from the dead. Time to burn the house down. Roland smiled, just barely. A ghost of a grin. For the first time since the crash, he felt alive. The encrypted message from Marius Ren had a time signature. 2:12 a.m. It arrived without fanfare, no notification sound, no pop-up, just a blinking dot in the lower right corner of the terminal's interface. Susan had been dozing lightly in the visitor chair when the tablet pulsed. She leaned forward, read the message once, and slowly sat back in silence, her mind turning. Roland Smith, half hidden beneath sterile sheets and machine wires, blinked once. The ghost had returned. At precisely 3 a.m., the terminal buzzed again. This time it wasn't a message, it was an access request. Marius Ren is attempting to establish secure tunnel. Y/N? Roland lifted his fingers slowly and tapped once. The screen flickered, then split. On one half, code scrolled endlessly, a latticework of digital DNA, while on the other, a grainy image resolved. Not a video feed, but a still shot refreshed every second or so. Ren's face, aged and lean, with crow's feet that looked carved rather than creased. His scruffy beard was flecked with white, and his eyes, once mischievous, were now solemn. You look like hell, boss, Ren said through the screen. Roland managed a raspy chuckle, then whispered, So do you. Ren's smile widened slightly, then vanished. What the hell happened, Roland? The billionaire lifted a trembling hand and typed with excruciating slowness. They tried to kill me. Alex. Clara. The board. I need to trigger the clause. Ren's brow furrowed. You don't mean. Roland typed 2 words. Ghost clause. Ren sat back, exhaled long and low. The ghost clause was a failsafe, an insurance policy built into Smith Corps' foundational charter during its first restructuring. Only 3 people had ever known of its existence: Roland Smith, Marius Ren, and a retired judge who had mysteriously vanished into a Bahamian retirement community under a new name. It had been Ren's idea. The clause stated that in the event of confirmed internal sabotage that endangered the life or executive function of the company's founder, a silent power transfer could be activated through a pre-programmed quantum key. This would transfer operational control to a trust, the Smith Vanguard, run by an AI-guided governance shell designed to temporarily halt all transactions, override the board, and audit all executive activity over the past 24 months. But there was a catch. It could only be activated from inside the Smith Corps mainframe, physically, and required biometric authentication and a secondary signature from Ren. I'll need to get into the data vault, Ren said quietly, already calculating risk. It's still in Geneva? Roland tapped. Moved. Level 3 Smith Corps Tower. New York HQ. Server bank under Black Iris Protocol. Ren hissed. They're not screwing around. He opened a second window and launched a scan. I'll start breaching the outer wall of the Iris net, but you'll need to wake up soon if we're going to finish this. Publicly. Susan, watching all this from the shadows of the room, finally spoke. "What happens if we succeed?" she asked. Ren looked at her through the lagged screen. "Then we freeze the board. Every crooked executive. Their transactions, holdings, shell core, all flagged and exposed. The SEC, the DOJ, the press, they'll tear them apart." "And if we fail?" she asked. Ren was silent for a moment. "Then they bury Roland for real this time." Later that day, Susan received a package, couriered from a shadow address. Inside was an Aegis biometric glove, designed to simulate Roland's unique fingerprint structure and nerve pulse signature. One of Ren's old projects. Highly illegal. Highly effective. She slipped it into the bottom of her bag without a word. That night, as the machines ticked around them and Roland rested with deliberate stillness, Susan leaned down beside his ear. "They have no idea what's coming," she whispered. "Tomorrow I go in. We plug the wire. And then you flip the world." Roland blinked once. His fingers twitched faintly beneath the sheets. At exactly 4:47 a.m., deep beneath Smithcore Tower in a data vault cooled to sub-zero temperatures, a small anomaly appeared in the Iris security log. A ghost signature, stamped with a long-dead biometric ID. An old key. A hidden door. The first spark of resurrection. It was raining the night she came. Not a soft spring drizzle, but a hard, vertical pour that drummed against the high glass windows of the medical suite like war drums. The kind of rain that silenced cities, turned headlights into ghosts, and pressed the world into a strange hush. Clara Smith arrived without security. No umbrella, no entourage, no makeup. Just a long charcoal coat soaked at the sleeves, dark hair pulled back, her eyes hollow as if sleep hadn't visited her in days. She didn't announce herself to the nurses. She didn't need to. They knew who she was. She entered the room without ceremony and shut the door behind her. For a moment, she just stood there, staring at Roland's unmoving body. Her eyes flicked to the machines, to the quiet thrum of the monitors, to the slight rise and fall of his chest. And then she laughed once. Quietly. Bitterly. "Of course it would be this way," she said, approaching the bed. Roland, eyes closed, lay still. But he was listening. Every word. Every breath. Clara walked slowly to the chair at his bedside, peeled off her wet coat, and draped it across the arm. She sat down carefully, smoothing the creases in her dress with mechanical grace. When she finally looked at him again, her expression had shifted. Something had cracked open behind her poise. "I used to sit beside you like this when you'd fall asleep in your office," she murmured. "Remember that? After those endless 48-hour builds, launching product lines that hadn't even been beta tested. You'd work until your eyes bled, and I'd force you to lie on that awful leather couch while I sent your emails." She leaned back in the chair and exhaled long and low. "I loved you then. Not the way people say it to sound noble. I loved you, even when I hated you." Outside, thunder rolled through the city like distant cannon fire. "I remember the moment I knew it was over," she continued. "We were at the Tranquil Gala. You were pitching Smithcore's AI safety project to that senator from Oregon. What was her name? Doesn't matter. I stood beside you for 2 hours while you talked to her like I didn't exist. And I realized," she paused, her voice tight, "I wasn't your partner anymore. I was part of your set dressing." She glanced away, jaw clenched. Her fingers twisted in her lap. "I gave you 8 years. My career. My reputation. My womb." That last word hit the air like a blade, unspoken until now. Even in the stillness, Roland's heart monitor ticked just a fraction faster. She noticed. "Oh, that gets a response," she whispered, her tone cutting. "You remember. The miscarriage? The night you told your board you were grateful for the clarity? That it let you focus again." She stood up suddenly, the chair creaking behind her. Walked to the window. Pressed her palm to the glass, watching the rain ripple down the surface like a veil. "You never asked me how I felt. Not once. You moved on, launched 2 new divisions, won that humanitarian award from Davos, and I dried blood out of our mattress for a week." The silence grew so heavy it felt like gravity. "I stayed, Roland. I stayed. Even after that. Do you know why? She turned slowly, her voice low, trembling but precise. Because I told myself that if I couldn't have you, I would have your empire. She walked back toward the bed and leaned down, just close enough that her breath tickled the edge of his cheek. I didn't push your jet out of the sky. I'm not a murderer. But I knew what Alex was doing. The funds, the shell companies, the offshore sweep. I let it happen. I facilitated it. I made it clean. She straightened up, eyes gleaming with something between fury and release. I did it not because I wanted your money, but because I wanted justice. For every time you sidelined me, gaslit me, used me to soften your image while treating me like an inconvenience. She turned toward the door, pausing one last time. Whatever happens next, know that I earned every inch of it. Then her voice softened, just a hair. And if you really are awake in there, then maybe you'll finally understand what it feels like to be powerless. She left the room without looking back. Susan entered 20 minutes later, having watched everything from the monitor hub outside. She found Roland with tears in his eyes. Not falling, just resting, balanced at the rim. She said nothing. Instead, she slipped a drive into the Echolink terminal. Her confession's been recorded, Susan whispered. Audio. Facial recognition. Time-stamped. She paused, then added gently, Are you all right? Roland didn't move, but a single tear rolled slowly down his cheek. It wasn't grief. It was awakening. The kind that comes when your pain finally turns into purpose. The morning began with rain again, but this time, the city felt different. The storm had passed, but its scent still clung to the air, earthy and electric. The skyline shimmered under a gray veil, and the glass-paneled facade of Smith Core Tower reflected a ghost of the sky above it, ominous, silent, waiting. Inside the private suite at Armitage Medical Pavilion, Roland Smith opened his eyes. Not the shallow flickers of feigned REM movement. Not the slow-blinking Morse code Susan had taught him. He opened them fully, and sat up. Machines shrieked around him, as if startled by his resurrection. Alarms pinged. The oxygen mask fell from his face. Nurses burst into the room seconds later, led by a terrified intern, clutching a crash cart. Roland looked at them, calm, collected, a little pale, but alive in a way no machine could misread, and said 2 words. Call my attorney. 35 minutes later, Diana Coleman was standing in the hallway, soaked from the waist down in rain, clutching a leather briefcase like a weapon. Susan let her in without ceremony. The moment Diana saw him, her composure cracked. She dropped the briefcase, crossed the room, and held his face in her hands. Jesus Christ, Roland, she whispered. I thought they buried you. They tried, he rasped, voice thick and unused. They missed. Tears didn't fall. Not yet. They didn't have time. Susan sealed the doors and dimmed the lights. From her coat, she withdrew a small tablet and slid it across the bed to Diana. Everything's on here, Susan said. Boardroom surveillance. Financial anomalies. Clara's confession. Alex's offshore accounts. Audio, timestamps, source authentication, and preliminary forensic analysis. Diana opened the case. Inside was a stack of legal papers, already stamped and tabbed. Declaration of legal competency, she said, handing him a pen. Prepared 2 weeks ago. You just needed to be conscious. Sign here. He did. The stroke was shaky but legible. The ink was still wet when she handed him the next document. Executive retainer. You're about to declare war. Roland nodded. About time. At Smith Core Tower, the board was already assembling for the emergency session. Alex Smith, flanked by 2 legal advisors and his executive assistant, entered the main boardroom with a practiced expression of urgency. He straightened his tie, tapped his smartwatch, and checked the files on the holographic projector. All set, he asked his aide. Clause 16 is prepped. Dr. Lauren's official report is en route. Motion of incapacitation will pass with a 5-3 vote, assuming no delays. Alex smiled. Let's put the old man to bed. The boardroom was glass and chrome, its circular table bathed in artificial light. 17 floors below, the city pulsed with disinterest. The meeting began. Diana Coleman walked in first, alone. Her presence was enough to trigger whispers, a few raised brows. Then Susan entered, flanked by two plainclothes federal observers. The room stirred. Alex stood. "What is this?" he asked. "You'll see," Diana replied coolly. And then he walked in. Roland Smith in a black tailored jacket, leaning slightly on a cane, but upright, breathing, present. The room fell silent. Alex took a step back as if physically struck. Clara, seated across the table, froze in place. Her mouth parted, but no words came out. Roland's gaze swept the room, slow and deliberate. "Please," he said. "No one stand on my account." He took the seat at the head of the table. Alex finally found his voice. This is a stunt." He was declared medically. Roland cut in. "As you can see, I'm not anymore." He placed a hard drive on the table. Diana connected it to the central console. The room darkened as the screen ignited behind her, displaying a live feed of code and financial trails. "Let the record show," she said, "that this footage and documentation confirm a coordinated act of internal fraud, conspiracy, and attempted usurpation of corporate governance by acting interim CEO Alex Smith, in collaboration with Clara Smith." On cue, Susan stepped forward and tapped a button on the terminal. Clara's voice filled the room. "I told myself that if I couldn't have you, I would have your empire. I facilitated it. I made it clean. Whatever happens next, know that I earned every inch of it." Silence fell again. Alex's face drained of color. "This doesn't prove anything." Ren's face appeared suddenly on the screen, patching in remotely. "Hi, everyone," he said with a slight wave. "Marius Ren here, former chief security engineer. The documents you're about to see have already been transferred to the SEC, FBI, and Internal Revenue Service. You can try to delete them, but it won't help. They've been mirrored across 214 nodes, half of them in countries that don't even recognize SmithCore patents." Roland stood. "I built this company from a garage in North Manchester," he said, voice rising. "I built it with dirt under my fingernails and blood in my lungs. You think you can take it from me while I lie in a hospital bed?" He stepped closer to Alex, eyes blazing. "You should have made sure I was dead." Security entered a moment later, flanking Alex and Clara. Neither resisted. There was nothing left to say. As they were escorted out, Clara paused. She looked at Roland, no rage, no remorse. Just exhaustion. Then she disappeared through the door. That night, Roland stood alone in his private office, staring out at the city. Susan entered quietly and joined him at the glass. "You did it," she said. "No," he replied. "We did." Behind them, a new document was printing on his desk. Official approval of the Smith Vanguard Initiative, an autonomous ethics committee funded and protected under its own charter. Tomorrow, the press would feast. The stock would tumble. The sharks would circle. But for now, the house was his again. And the ghosts were gone. It had been 10 days since the boardroom coup. 10 days since security escorted Alex Smith and Clara out of SmithCore Tower, their exit broadcast, silently, discreetly, through encrypted shareholder bulletins and closed-door legal briefings. The media hadn't caught the full picture yet. Only whispers, a few anonymous leaks, and that iconic image of Roland Smith, standing tall, cane in hand, walking through the lobby like a resurrected myth. But the real story wasn't the downfall. It was what came after. Roland stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling windows of his executive office, renovated since his last tenure, though the shape remained the same. The corner he once hated, with its relentless sunlight, had become his favorite now. A quiet shrine. A reminder. The skyline stretched endlessly before him, vast and glimmering, but different now. Less like territory to conquer, and more like a terrain to protect. Behind him, the hum of soft voices, tablets flicking, meetings unfolding, the quiet, rhythmic heartbeat of a company reawakening. And at the center of it all, a new name on the door. The Smith Vanguard Initiative. The Vanguard wasn't just another corporate department, it was an autonomous ecosystem. A firewall against corruption, powered by an AI built on ethical algorithms co-authored by Ren, Susan, and a team of digital humanists pulled from exiled think tanks and independent oversight labs. It answered not to the CEO, not to the board, not even to shareholders. It answered only to the code it was built on, and the public trust. It's suicide, one investor said when the Vanguard was announced. It's evolution, Roland replied. Susan Monroe now wore a badge. A real one. Her title, Director of Corporate Integrity and Whistleblower Affairs. She moved through the building like a signal through a wire, sharp, impossible to ignore. Employees feared her at first. Then they began thanking her. She had a new apartment in Midtown and a dog named Milo, who'd been rescued the same week Roland had awakened. When asked by a reporter why she took the job, her answer was simple. Because truth needs teeth. Marius Wren returned to society reluctantly. For the first week, he worked from a repurposed server room beneath the old Smith Core R&D wing, surrounded by humming towers and stacks of open-energy drink cans. He declined all interviews. His only public statement came in the form of a 400-line poem titled, The Machine Eats Its Children, posted anonymously on a defunct blog from the early 2000s. It went viral in under an hour. Wren was now chief guardian of Vanguard infrastructure, his official title. Unofficially, Roland called him the last firewall. Roland himself didn't return to the limelight immediately. The press screamed for him. Interviews, speeches, a Netflix docuseries. He refused them all. Instead, he spent his days walking the halls. Quietly. Observing. Meeting junior developers. Sitting in on ethics training. Reading handwritten notes from staff who thanked him for returning. For surviving. For not letting the rot win. And in the stillness of his nights, he sat in the dark, eyes on the city, listening to the rain. On a quiet Thursday afternoon, Diana Coleman joined him on the rooftop terrace. Just the two of them. A bottle of red wine. No glasses. You ever wonder, she said, sipping from the neck, if all of this was supposed to happen? Roland considered it. Then took the bottle. Sometimes. But that makes it sound like someone was in control. Maybe someone was, she said, looking skyward. He shook his head, smiling faintly. If so, they have a cruel sense of humor. They sat in silence for a while. The wind tugged at their jackets. Then she asked, Do you think they'll try again? Alex. Clara, the rest? He nodded once. Yes. Someone always does. Then what? Roland leaned forward, eyes distant but resolute. Then we remind them what happens when you come for a man who's already been to the other side. Across the city, a quiet revolution was brewing. Other companies began asking for Vanguard's framework. Universities requested guest lectures. Activists requested code. Governments, hesitantly, requested consulting. Smith Core's stock rebounded in ways no one predicted. Not from hype, but from faith. Because somewhere along the line, people had stopped believing in corporations. And then, one of them came back from the dead and chose to change. Not for survival. Not for power. But because he could. We have come to the end of the story. I hope you enjoyed it. Leave a like and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more interesting stories.